Ms.
I
Scott.
am breathless but ready.
I just want to ask you a question about something you said in your statement. Shomik, can we go to WITN 525 7001? So that's your statement. It's on the second page. It's paragraph 4. You were asked a question by the inquiry. You were asked to describe your role and responsibilities as chair of Caxton, and you say this: I was responsible to the government for overseeing the governance of the organisation and in holding the CEO and the trustees to account for the effective management and administration of the charity in accordance with the charitable aims. Can you tell us in what way you considered yourself to be responsible to the government?
I felt I know I was responsible to the government for the proper distribution of the funds that they provided to us, as any organisation who is in that position is.
As the chair of a charity, did you consider that you had a duty to the charity itself and to act in the interests of the charity and to be independent of the government?
I think that I always felt I was independent of the government, but when you come to the public account and the receipt of government money, you have to deal with it appropriately and in line with their rules.
So
I think you could see from the action I took as chair that we did act independently because we acted in the best interests of the beneficiaries, as we said we would, and in line with the information we were acquiring in terms of needs.
Did you see the annual reviews with the Department of Health as meetings in which you had to account to them for the ways in which the trust was spending its allocation?
I had to account, well, the chief executive is the accountable officer, obviously, but we had to account for the regularity and probity of the use of the resources against the deed against which we were established and the use of the money that they required of us.
It is an arrangement where the Department of Health provides all the funds for the Caxton and then holds them to account as to how they spend it. Is that arrangement, do you think, consistent with Caxton operating as an independent charity?
No, but it was a fact of life. I did not feel beholden to the Department of Health. I just knew that we had to account effectively for the use of their resources for the purposes intended.
So do you think that the Caxton Foundation's independence was impugned by that arrangement?
No.
And what steps were in place, or what procedures or protocols were in place to ensure that was the case, that the Caxton Foundation's independence wasn't impugned by that arrangement?
We had no interference in determining the vision, in determining our priorities. We were not instructed to undertake certain pieces of work, and we would have made sure that as we were established in the best to work in the best interests of the potential beneficiaries, that is what we did. And I don't think it was the intention of the Department of Health to prevent us from doing that.
During the annual meetings with the Department of Health that you attended with the Chief Executive, was there an opportunity to raise concerns about the allocation, about underfunding and matters of that nature?
Yes, there was every opportunity to do that.
And were those opportunities taken during your chair?
The issue of the underfunding was a difficult one until latterly to raise with them, because we always underspent. So asking for additional money when you hadn't spent the money you were given wasn't a very strong starting point. However, when we had our request for the funding of the regular payment scheme refused, then in the next round of discussions, we obviously, and the numbers of potential beneficiaries had risen, we then had the lever to argue for additional resources.
And I'll come on to ask you about that in a bit more detail and perhaps show you some documents. But just on that point you raised that the Caxton Foundation had underspent in the years preceding your chairmanship. What did you understand the reason for that to have been?
My understanding was that the Department of Health had provided us with their estimate of the amount of money we would require given the potential number of beneficiaries, but we didn't get all those beneficiaries coming forward.
So the trustees at that stage were taking a cautious approach given the fact that they may meet a huge rise in beneficiary numbers and have to meet need from out of the same amount of money.
That is not my understanding of the situation. My understanding was that we were just not getting sufficient beneficiaries coming to us, rather than us being too cautious. The only time we started being cautious was when we had to reconsider the level at which we funded the regular payment scheme.
Does that surprise you, given what the board discovered when they were looking at the regular payment scheme in terms of the levels of poverty that many beneficiaries were living in?
Yes.
And do you have any understanding as to how that could have arisen, that there were many beneficiaries in those years where the Caxton was underfunding living in poverty, but the Caxton were underspending? Were those beneficiaries simply not coming forward and asking for money?
That is true. And when they were coming forward to ask for grants, really they were very prudent in the way in which they asked for a number of grants. And that is why we started to take the discussion forward on trying to support those in the greatest poverty in a better way than relying on them applying for grants, etc.
And you're talking there about the implementing a regular payment scheme, are you?
Yeah, yes.
So just to be clear to you and to those that are watching, that I'm not going to be asking you questions about ways that decisions were made by the NWC about grant applications and so on, because you didn't sit on the NWC, did you?
No.
And we've got Mr. Lister, who was the chair of the NWC and indeed vice chair of Caxton, coming to give evidence towards the end of the week. So those questions will be directed towards him. But I will be asking you questions about the regular payment scheme, because you were involved in that and you were involved in presenting that to the Department of Health, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes, indeed.
Just sticking then with generally on meetings with the Department of Health, were those meetings minuted by the Caxton Foundation?
No.
And why was that?
There were meetings convened by the Department of Health.
And so you would expect the Department of Health to minute them, would you?
Yes.
And would you receive copies of those minutes?
Yes.
And when I mean you, I mean the Caxton Foundation.
Yes.
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 What was the, again, as a matter of sort of general principle, what was the Caxton Foundation's strategy with respect to the Department of Health during your chairmanship?
They were our funders. We needed to keep them apprised of our policies going forward and what we considered to be the main issues facing ourselves as an organisation in terms of meeting the requirements of our objectives, and to start to discuss with them things like the rationale behind the regular payment scheme. So to warn them in advance that there would be additional bids coming in to enable us to do this and why we were doing it. It was a discussion about our priorities and our objectives.
And did you consider that you had a campaigning or lobbying role with the Department of Health? Did you consider that was part of the role of the Caxton Foundation?
I didn't consider that we were campaigning because that was not part of our responsibility, but I did think that we could act as advocates, particularly in terms of what we were finding in evidence from our beneficiaries to produce a better result for them, which was the basis of the charity in the first place.
And why did you take the view that campaigning was not part of the responsibility of Caxton?
There were campaign groups that were most effective.
And were you aware that the trust deed would have allowed Caxton Foundation to campaign had they wanted to?
As I advised you, I'm afraid I'd never seen that trust deed before.
And that wasn't a and that wasn't a conversation you had with any of your fellow trustees or the chief executive?
No.
And I think I interrupted you saying something. Did you want to complete what you were saying?
Sorry. Just to reinforce the point that I did believe, and the board considered, that they were advocates for the people they were serving.
And did you think it would be helpful in terms of trying to advocate for the Caxton Foundation to take steps to increase what's been called in documentation and other witnesses, increase Caxton's political capital, i.e. sort of push it up the Department of Health agenda?
Well, I didn't consider it was at the bottom of the Department of Health's agenda. Certainly, I don't think it's every charity that's brought in for a discussion with the Minister every year. And that certainly gave us a platform on which to advocate and to advise the Minister of precisely what we were doing and why we were doing it and the needs of the people that we were serving.
And was your personal style, if I can put it that way, as the leader of the Caxton Foundation, was it to push the Department of Health, or were you more of a sort of don't upset them approach and try and keep them on side? Would you be able to describe your style to us?
My style in general is not the latter. If I feel seriously about something, then people will know what my views are, and my views will be supported by evidence.
And did you ever get the impression that if you took that forceful approach, the department might withdraw funding or even close Caxton down?
I never imagined that they would withdraw funding.
So,
because that would be a huge justification, wouldn't it? Which I don't think that they would wish to handle.
I think you've just told us that you don't think that Caxton was at the bottom of the Department of Health's priority list. What was your impression of how the Department of Health viewed Caxton and the importance of Caxton?
Certainly from the discussions, they thought we were fulfilling an important role amongst a group of beneficiaries who did have quite a high profile, as denoted really by the fact that the APPG were undertaking an investigation and inquiry into what was going on. So that is ensures that has a high profile. So that was my view, that we were treated equably and listened to.
Just turning more specifically in a bit more detail then to the funding, is this right that because of the way money was provided by the Department of Health to the Caxton Foundation, any underspend effectively meant that the Caxton Foundation lost the money, i.e. it couldn't be rolled over as a reserve to the following year?
Yes, and that's what I wanted to correct in my answer to question 62, thanks to the helpful information you provide, 63, because that is an incorrect answer. I'm afraid I've got the Patients Association and Caxton mixed up for one moment in that. And so 62 it is, sorry. We didn't have reserves. We had to return unspent monies.
So if I'm plucking figures out of the air here, but if in a particular year the Department of Health allocation is 2 million and you only spend 1.5, actually you only get 1.5 because the $500,000 will go back to the Department of Health and can't be used the following year.
No, it couldn't. But it didn't affect the amount of money we got the next year. They didn't reduce the allocation as a consequence of that.
So can we come on then to the funding bid made at the end of 2013 to fund the regular payment scheme? What did you understand to be the reason why a regular payment scheme had not been implemented before you arrived at Caxton?
I don't know why a regular payment scheme had not been implemented before I came to Caxton.
Can we look at a document then, AHOH 601. And we can see at the top there, business case for increased funding for the Caxton Foundation from 2014-2015 for a regular payment scheme. And then if we go over to page 2, we can see the table at the bottom, income benchmarks, and it has various different household compositions along the left-hand column, going from single with no children up to partner with 4 children. And then various income benchmarks, Joseph Rowntree being the most generous, somewhere between 16 and 45, then 60% median income, 8.9 thousand down to 23.9 thousand, and then the 80% median income, 11.9 down to 31.9. And is this right, that initially you had requested funding so that you could put in place a regular payment scheme that would mean that anybody who had an income of less than the 80% median income would be eligible for a regular payment, and that regular payment would bring them up to the 80% median income level?
Yes.
Can we go then on to page 3 of that document, please? At the bottom of that page, it is set out the reasons why that particular scheme was put forward. As expected, the financial modelling showed that the Joseph Rowntree model would be extremely expensive, as well as being at a level which could act as a disincentive to independent living and encourage dependency among Caxton's client community. And then say 60%, the 60% median income, Caxton feels it is only raising people to the poverty line, and that's not sufficient and doesn't reflect the additional cost of living with hepatitis C, and consider that they should in fact receive higher levels at the 80% of median income. And then it says, well, you then thought about differentiating between the two different communities, i.e. the infected community and the bereaved community, and felt uncomfortable about doing that, and so haven't differentiated between the two communities. So can I just ask you about this idea that the Joseph Rowntree level of regular pay could act as a disincentive to independent living and encourage dependency? A concern about encouraging dependency is something that we see frequently in Caxton Foundation documentation, and indeed it's something you mention in your witness statement. What was meant by that?
Ours was a grant-giving organisation primarily, and the founders of the foundation were concerned about the prevalence of a dependency culture. On what basis they were, I don't know, because I didn't see that information. But as you can tell from that first strategy overview, the same issue was raised. I think the problem we were trying to solve here was a problem of people who really were below the poverty line. The trust board did not consider that it would be sufficient just to raise people, if we could, to the poverty line because of the reasons stated in the business case, and wished to do better than that. This, of course, whatever we did not preclude the delivery of grants to the same people, because that would continue. But I had asked that we should look at what the poverty levels were described as being at the time, and what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation would recommend. I think our ideal in the longer run was the Rowntree Foundation levels, because by then we would have been able to judge whether any levels of dependency were rising, and to have debated further whether dependency was something that would be endorsed, if you can use that word, by the board for the future. So we, I think, had moderated our view about dependency in even considering having a regular payment scheme. But we still wanted people to be encouraged to try and lead, with support, a more fulfilled and independent life. If that wasn't possible, then what could we do?
And is one of the concerns about dependency that if you set the regular payment too high, people that could work wouldn't work? Is that the concern?
That was a concern, which is why we wanted to evaluate the consequences of a regular payment scheme. But our primary issue was that we felt very strongly that we had to do something to support better those who were in Parla's situation.
Do you recall how this business case was presented to the Department of Health? Was it done in a meeting, or was it simply submitted as a written document?
There was a discussion about it with the department.
And if we just turn on to page 5 of that document, at the bottom there, at the last paragraph there, on the Caxton is therefore submitting this proposal to the DH for consideration. Caxton has set out its preferred option for a scheme based on 80% of median income, which it believes will best meet its clients' need without engendering dependency. However, Caxton understands that the DH may wish to discuss modifications to this and look forward to having the opportunity to discuss the proposal in more detail. So was it your expectation that even if the Department of Health didn't say yes, that there would be some discussion about it?
Yes, and I understand there was discussion between the blood team and the chief executive.
After this business case had been submitted?
Yes, that would be a normal process.
And in discussions that you'd had with the Department of Health prior to submitting this business case, what had they said to you about how had they given you any hints as to how the business case might be received?
No. But neither had they dissuaded us not to put it in.
Shamit, you can take that down. Were you aware at the time that the business case was submitted that the McFarlane Trust was providing top-up payments to to their registrants who were infected, who were receiving payments from the MFET, and they were providing payments to the non-infected community to guarantee their household income at £19,000 per annum.
As part of the discussion, when we started the discussion on the regular payment scheme, we were advised of that.
And is that something that featured in your discussions with the Department of Health? Look, this is you're funding Macfarlane sufficiently to provide this to their community. We need parity.
No, I personally never had that conversation with them, but the chief executive, who would have known what both schemes were aspiring to, would have had the opportunity to say that.
But as a matter of fact, do you know whether she did or not?
No. No, I'm sorry.
We just take you to the letter rejecting the business case. It's CAXT 40110_089.
Oh.
It's a letter of the 19th of February 2014.
Oh dear, I can't find it.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there we go.
It's up on the screen.
Thank you.
It says, thank you for submitting the business case. And then it just simply says, ministers have decided this is not the right time for an uplift in allocation, while they continue to consider how to best address a range of issues about the system of support available. And then the last paragraph, then it says, I can't confirm Caxton's allocation. And then I recognise that a decision not to increase funding will be disappointing news. I hope it won't come as a surprise given our discussion on a number of occasions and the continuing downward pressure on government spending. So it doesn't look like this is a response in which the Department of Health is willing to negotiate. Do you recall whether there were negotiations about your business case, or whether it was just, this looks like a straightforward rejection?
Yes.
And it is. Do you recall any discussion and negotiation with them?
No.
So if that had taken place, it would have been through Ms. Barlow? Yes.
But I think that is a fairly firm rejection.
And you say in your witness statement that you asked someone from the Department of Health to attend and explain the position to the board. There doesn't seem to be a record of anyone from the Department of Health attending a board meeting after the writing of this letter. Do you think they didn't take that opportunity?
No, I think they did come, but I can't see the record in the data that you've sent me, because I thought it was only reasonable for the department's representative to understand and allow us to restate our position, and for us to gain a better insight into the pressures on the department. And what we were going to do next was something that we needed to discuss.
And what was the strategy that the board and you used following this rejection? Was it to push for more? Was it to accept the decision? What happened next?
Well, the first thing we had to decide was, given the rejection, which was firm in Department of Health terms, what could we seek to achieve? And what were we going to discuss in ongoing discussions with the Department of Health on the scheme that we would try and put in, and where we would still wish to get to, and over what period of time, to start to have a better understanding of the financial situation in which the department found itself and the pressures with which they were juggling, to get almost a time frame of when we would be able to commence a regular payment scheme and what opportunity there would be to rebid for an improvement, particularly based on evidence from our original scheme. So those are the sorts of discussions that would go on following a rejection.
And was any consideration given to saying to the department, look, we've underspent for the last few years and you've had that money back which was allocated to us, can we not at least have that to put into the pot for our regular payment scheme?
But if unfortunately we might understand how the Department of Health's budget allocation works, and what was given back would no longer be available.
So the answer to my question
is...
They
have an annual MEG.
So the answer to my question is no, because in your view that wouldn't have got you anywhere.
No.
And was any consideration given to lobbying or campaigning at that stage, and doing something that might embarrass the Department of Health into changing their minds?
I think embarrassing the Department of Health into changing their minds is a way of dealing with them. But we wanted a long-term positive relationship with them, not subservient, but positive. And that the tactics of embarrassing people into a corner frequently doesn't work.
Can we look then, well, in fact, I can take you to the document if it exists, but is this right, that the scheme that the Caxton Foundation could afford in terms of regular payments was to identify those households whose income was less than 70% of the median income as being eligible, and then to make a payment to them, but not to bring them up to the 70% median income level, but to make a payment of them depending on the composition of their household of between £3,000 and £4,500 per annum.
Yes.
And is this all? Oh, sorry. Yes, very disappointing.
It was very disappointing.
And that in addition to that, the other amendments that had to be made to the regular payment scheme was that the new proposal, the new scheme, had to ignore the impact of a household of more than 2 children. In other words, the greatest payment one could get was as if you were 2 adults and 2 children.
Yes.
And in addition, that the scheme that the Caxton had to take into account when calculating household income the annual Stage 2 Skipton Fund payments made to those beneficiaries who had received a Skipton Stage 2 capital payment.
Yes, all things we didn't want.
And so the effect, particularly of that last alteration to the scheme, meant that those who were the illest, the most unwell, would in all likelihood not obtain a regular payment from the Caxton Fund. Is that right?
Yeah.
Were the regular was any discrepancy, or was there any difference in the way that the Caxton Fund applied the regular payment scheme between the infected and the non-infected community?
No, we still went for the bereaved community as well.
And you've mentioned in your oral evidence that following the increase in beneficiary numbers as a result of the Skipton look back, that discussions were undertaken with the Department of Health to see whether or not there was more funding available. Did you have those discussions with the Department of Health yourself, or were those conducted through Ms. Barlow?
Ms. Barlow had those, but with the endorsement of the board.
And do you have any particular recollection of how those discussions progressed, or what was said and so on?
No, but certainly it was reported back that there was, we were concerned that we'd had the rise in numbers which we'd been looking for a number of years, and we simply would not be able to maintain a regular payment scheme and all the additional beneficiaries within our allocation. I thought that actually we had a very strong case for an increase in the allocation as a consequence. But it did mean we had to take very difficult decisions at the latter end of 14.
And are you there are you there talking about making a decision to reduce the winter payment?
Yeah.
Was a formal business case or a more formal approach made to the Department of Health at that stage to try and increase the allocation as a result of the spike in beneficiary numbers? Or was it done informally?
I think it was done informally, but a formal case was going to be produced. The trouble was timing, which is why the discussions went on with the department, because the numbers of additional beneficiaries were rising very much in the period when departments of health would normally expect business cases to come in, and we just could not be sure, which is why they had to be apprised of the fact that our numbers were rising, which is what we wanted, and the difficult decisions that were being taken. So we were looking to produce a business case which could be considered in the latter end of the year, which would be more tangible and accurate than anything we could have produced before, because of the levels of uncertainty at that time.
Just on the numbers of beneficiaries, just so that we have your evidence in relation to that. Can we look, Shomik, at CAXT 5035_078? This is the annual report on the 31st of March 2015. So it's an annual report that's not signed by you because you have left as chair by then. But if we turn to page 8 of that document, we can see under Caxton's beneficiary community, and the second talks about the look back in the first paragraph. The second paragraph gives us the number. By 31st of March, this is 3 lines down, by 31st of March, the number of Caxton beneficiaries had risen to 1,080 from 689 on the 1st of April 2014, an increase of 57% for the year. And Mrs. Lloyd, you'll recall that in the annual report that we looked at the year before, when you first arrived, that the number there at that stage was 555.
Yeah.
Is that how you recall the rise in numbers?
Yes, and then it continued to rise.
So the Department of Health, having turned down, first of all, your application for regular payment, and then having turned down your what you considered to be a very strong application for an increase in allocation as a result of the almost doubling of the numbers of the beneficiary community, did you seek to try and engage the APPG in this issue, see if you could garner some political capital?
I don't think so. I know there was a meeting of the APPG, but unfortunately I couldn't attend that, and I think that was in November. But I'm awfully sorry, I can't answer that question because I don't know.
And did you try and seek a meeting with the minister or anything of that nature, try and escalate the issue to someone more senior?
Not at that time, because the department is usually pretty late in allocating budgets, so we didn't know I still don't know what their decision was.
And then just lastly, on dealings with government, did you have any direct dealings with any of the devolved administrations, or was all of your communication with government through the Department of Health?
No. The health minister, the new health minister in the Welsh government, asked to see me about a number of things, one of which was the work with Caxton. And I explained what we were trying to do and what the issues were. And he wanted me to speak to the Wales APPG chair, who was Julie Morgan. And I agreed that if invited, I certainly would do. So there was a separate discussion. But he actually wanted to talk to me about more than just Caxton at the time.
So a meeting with the Welsh administration, any meetings with or communication with Scottish or Northern Irish
No.
administration?
Well, we had the, no, we didn't, no.
I'm going to ask you now about the dispute between Macfarlane Trust and the Haemophilia Society that occurred during your chairmanship.
Yeah.
But before I do, can you just, in your statement, you tell us that you and Jan Barlow met fairly regularly with the Haemophilia Society. What was the purpose of those meetings, and what was the relationship like before the allegations were made by Ms. Carroll against Jan Barlow and Mr. Evans?
The purpose of the meeting was to share information about what we were doing and what our aspirations were, and for them and the Hepatitis C Trust to share information coming back from their candidates. Obviously, our relationship was closer with the Hepatitis C Trust, which you would expect, and they were very helpful in trying to promote our work to their clients. The relationship had been with the Haemophilia Society had been amicable and professional, as you would expect.
And helpful to the Caxton Foundation?
Yes, where they could help us, they did.
Was the Caxton Foundation involved in any way in the dispute with the Haemophilia Society? Did it, for example, take part in the instruction of lawyers or pay anything for the lawyers?
No.
Why was it necessary, in your view, to suspend relations with the Haemophilia Society in light of the allegations Ms. Carroll made?
I took that decision because the lawyers for MFT had advised the chief executive not to have any meetings with Miss Carroll whilst their dispute continued. We were just about to have a meeting with Miss Carroll, and in the light of the lawyers' advice, we decided to defer that meeting until the dispute was resolved or further clarification was available on the situation.
And this occurred right at the end of your time at the Caxton Foundation, so you...
Absolutely, right at the end.
Right at the end.
Yes.
In fact, it was the meeting at which you announced that you were stepping down.
Yes.
Were you concerned, nevertheless, that the suspension of contact might have an impact on the beneficiary community?
I wasn't at the time because I did not expect the suspension of the relationship to be long-lasting. And if there had been, my view at the time was if there had been an irreconcilable dispute between MFT and the society, then the Board of Trustees of Caxton would have to act to restore a relationship with the Haemophilia Society.
And of course, this came shortly afterwards, after the APPG had made a recommendation that the Haemophilia Society should have a larger role to play in the Caxton Foundation by appointing 3 trustees.
Yes.
So the relationship with the Haemophilia Society was presumably at that point quite important to the Caxton Foundation. Is that right? Is that fair?
Yes, it was one of our important trusts.
I've had a couple of questions over the break-in from call participants. The first, one of them I've already asked, but the first of which is whether you know, were trustee appointments during your time at Caxton Foundation considered by the Commissioner for Public Appointments?
No.
And the second question is whether you can recall how the Skipton Fund actually contacted beneficiaries when they were doing the look back. Do you recall how that contact was made?
No. I'm sorry.
There are so other witnesses we can take that issue up with later on during the week. So those are the questions that I had for Mrs. Lloyd, and the questions that I received during the break for Mrs. Lloyd. I'm going to suggest that we have a short break for any further questions that have arisen as a result of the evidence that we've just heard. Yes,
well,
so 10 minutes.
Let's take a break till 5:10. 5:10.
And so Mrs. Lloyd needs to be given the warning.
Yes, of course. What I should have told you at the last break, I'm sorry, my failing. You're giving evidence that you must not discuss any matter which you have already dealt with in evidence or anything which you think you may yet be asked to deal with anyone, whoever that anyone is, though anything else is entirely a matter for you. It's plain from what you've already said that you may have various pressing issues to deal with. That's fine.
No. Thank you. Thank you.